the Bank.
Hey Brett, how's it going this week?
Good, Ange. How are you?
Good. Well, that means it's another episode of Money in the Bank, the podcast where we talk about all things related to personal finance and more. So it has been a while. It has been a few months since we've released an episode.
Yeah, and so what does that mean? It means we've been doing a lot of interesting things in our personal life. We've made couple big changes, and we'll be slowly, I think, releasing what those changes have been over the next couple episodes, because we're going to tie it all together.
Yeah, and quite honestly, we've just been busy, and even more honestly, I will never put out content that I am not completely proud of. And in the interim, we recorded a few episodes, and we weren't fully satisfied with them, so we never released them. And we're really kind of just figuring out what direction we want to take the podcast. So if you have any suggestions or feedback, we always welcome that. You can email me at Angie@moneyinthebankpodcast.com. We have some ideas of what we want to do in the future. And I think it's going to shift away a little bit from focusing on like the hard facts of personal finance, because we've talked about most of the areas that we really can pretty extensively. And I think we're going to shift more to just kind of talk about our path in our financial journey and, you know, things that kind of help motivate us or whatever that might be. So we have some cool ideas for the direction we're going to go in the future, but as always, we welcome feedback as well.
Right, and we think that'll really resonate with a lot of our current listeners and kind of what their goals are. And we've gotten a lot of good feedback and questions from people over time since we started the podcast a couple of years ago now. So we do really evaluate all of that stuff and really value the feedback from you guys all the time.
And we appreciate all of our listeners, but we have like a lot in Australia and New Zealand, and that makes me so happy. Like, I love hearing from you guys. It's really cool to me, and like Australia is still on our bucket list of places to go someday. So, you know, if we could ever make it there and meet some of you guys, that would just be really awesome too. So
I'm game anytime. All
right. So this week, though, Brett, we're going to talk about identity theft because I was a victim of pretty actually serious identity theft. So one of the things we've been dealing with in the last few months is, what do you do when your identity has been stolen, and how do you go on a roadmap to recover?
Right. Yeah, you were pretty severely attacked. Had most of your like social security number, personal information, former addresses, like everything anybody would need to just do anything under your name, somebody had a hold of, and they were doing about anything that they could, right? So
rapidly,
tons of credit cards, right? That's the easy one. They opened like rental agreements with like leases and companies and bank accounts. Like, they really ran the train on you.
Yeah, but before we dive into all of those specifics, it is time for your trivia question.
No, we can keep going.
How many Americans in 2018 were impacted by identity theft? So there were about 300 million Americans total that lived in the country at that time. How many of them were impacted by credit theft?
Including children and stuff, counting everybody?
Counting everybody, because like, a lot of kids actually are heavily impacted by credit theft because they're like social security numbers that are just like out there that nobody else is doing anything with.
Right,
So,
they don't use them
fun
until
fact.
they're 18, right? So,
right. And it can fly under the radar because kids aren't checking their credit score.
I imagine it's probably a lot. We know a couple people that have, you know, even just personally, that have had like pretty serious identity theft. So I would say the number is probably pretty high. Like, I don't know, like 10 million, something like that.
60 million.
1 year?
In 5 people in America are subject to identity theft.
Every year?
Every year.
Oh my gosh.
Which,
right.
Now this is probably a range, right? It probably ranges from, you know, having somebody like steal your credit card, because we've had that hacked before, independently of credit, all the way to kind of what happened to me, which was like full credit takeover. So let me just give a little bit backstory about what exactly happened to me and how I remedied it, and then kind of what I learned from that and good advice for everybody to do going forward. I think that'll be beneficial. So I check my Credit Karma pretty regularly. I also have Mint, which pulls your credit for you. And I log in one day and I noticed that there were like 7 hard inquiries. And I was like, that's a huge red flag because I haven't applied for any credit cards recently. You know, I had my mortgage over the summer that I applied for, but not 7 times. So I opened it and immediately I see like PayPal, Wayfair, Best Buy, all these things that I don't recognize. All these credit cards.
Yeah, all credit cards.
And 2 of them were like property management companies. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I bought a condo. And so I was like, what do I do? So I found out that, in total I had 17 hard inquiries. And, the way I actually found this out was even before logging into Credit Karma, I got a letter in the mail saying that my request for a credit card was denied.
Right, that's right.
Which has not happened to me since I was like 18 because I've built up a pretty good credit. So I was like, well, that's weird that it got denied and I didn't apply for this. So, and then I logged onto my Credit Karma and I found 17 different inquiries. And I was like, what do I do? Because I had never dealt with this. So the course of action was to log on to the 3 credit bureaus independently, which are Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. And some of them I could dispute online, and some of them I had to call, but I had to basically say, I did not do any of these hard inquiries. And then the really fun part was I also had to contact each of the credit servicers independently. So I had to call like Best Buy Credit Card and Synchrony. And this was a range of degree of helpfulness. Like some of them, like Synchrony or Chase, they could log in on their end and see that I had been denied and just kind of immediately remove that request for me. And some of them were like, we can't really see this information, so, it didn't go through. You just got denied, but we'll put a flag in our system. So all of them were very appreciative of me calling, saying that I was doing the right thing and helping them beef up their process. But what blows my mind about this is that, so the person who is applying for this stuff, they somehow also added an address in Georgia, where I assume is where they live, and that was added to my credit report as like an address that I lived at.
Right, which is crazy.
Crazy that they can do that.
Yeah.
And the other crazy thing was they didn't even get my last name right.
Right. Most of the time, the people, the credit cards that were being applied for or opened didn't even match the spelling of your correct name.
Or they missed half the letters.
Right.
So that was mind-opening to me.
And hard for you to trace it down because they couldn't even look up your name in the system because it was just wrong.
Right.
Or mistyped or whatever.
Yeah, I was like, this is my last name. And they were like, are you sure? And I was like, well, it could be under this, but that's wrong. And they were like, oh yeah, we found it. And I was like, and so then I had to also dispute an address with all of the credit reporting agencies saying I've never lived in Georgia, and I had to dispute names. So I found out by logging onto all of these credit reporting agencies that it wasn't just that name that somehow got added. It was several different misspellings and last names that just weren't mine.
Right. So I think the end result of that was it was so easy for those names to get added to the system because there's no check for that. If somebody registers, I think, with your social security number and applies for any credit card or anything, it gets permanently added to your credit, to the credit unions or the credit bureaus, those 3 agencies. It just adds it to their system. There's no check, there's no counterbalance, and it's super hard to get them removed. But it's just you could put down literally any name tied to your social security number when you submit the form, and it just adds it as an alias to your account.
Which that really blew my mind because I guess I always thought that if somebody is applying for credit in my name, it needs to be in my name.
A perfect match.
I thought it would have to match name, address, social security number, but no, that's all kind of a lie. Which is really funny because Brett and I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. When we got married, we merged our last names together. We actually had to go to court to do an official name change to get all of our documents changed. I could have just written it down anywhere and it would have been added as a legal alias for me. So apparently I didn't need to go through that hassle.
So was there anything else that you had to chase down or were some pain points throughout this process?
So those were the biggest pain points, was calling, 18 different credit card companies, getting all of those disputes removed. The really hard ones were the rental companies because it was outsourced to a third party and they were like, we sent that information back to the landlord and we don't have it. And So it was mostly on those situations working with the credit reporting agencies directly to make sure that they knew they weren't mine. And I would say the biggest pain point was dealing with 3 independent agencies instead of having like one source I could go to.
The 3 different credit agencies?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. I had to go to them independently.
Because they didn't even all have the same like data.
Correct.
Right, on their end.
So they all, like different credit card companies might go through different credit agencies to get your credit score.
Right.
So some use TransUnion, some use Experian. And so I never realized how disjoint that system was, where like some of them were only with TransUnion, some of them were only with Experian. And so I had to be diligent about cross-referencing everything to make sure I compiled a single list of everything that got pulled and could clean it up.
Right. Yeah. Normally you think of this, the American credit system here as there's these 3 different companies, and they're all just different doorways that people can access into the same kind of like database of like, this is the credit record, right? This is like super important data. Everything that people do in the United States is based off this: buying a car, buying houses, asking for any kind of money, getting loans, getting credit cards and like store cards and other dumb things, right? But right, this is, so it's like really important information. And if your credit score is like gets a low rating, or there's anything fraudulent that happens and drops it really low, it really hurts you for like up to 10 years into your future. You're unable to like do any of those things I just listed, right? Because everybody will just deny you. But yeah, we're not seeing that. From going through this process, none of these agencies line up with each other whatsoever. They all have different records. Maybe at some point throughout a year or 2, they like true up the system or like compare notes. But like, that's not the case on a regular basis.
Right.
Like, you're lucky if that even happens.
So the other thing I actually did to report the identity theft was to go to like the federal identity theft department. It's like a Google search away, but I could fill out a form with that site as well. But I could only list 5 transactions that were fraudulent. And like I said, I had 18. So I listed 5. And then that was actually helpful because I could submit that to each one of the credit agencies as well as any credit card companies that asked for it, which helped show proof that I had like an official report saying these are fraudulent charges.
Okay, so you definitely recommend doing that as well.
Yes.
As a first step before you even go down any of these other roads.
Correct. You should do that pretty quickly in the process. It took me like 5 minutes to fill that out online. And some people also recommend going to your local police department. That was like something I kind of kept seeing. I felt like I didn't really need to do that because I live in Chicago, and I think the police here would be like, we have better things to do than like, what do you mean? Okay, you have identity theft. Like, we can't do anything about that. And none of it was local. It was like in Georgia. So I was like, I compared some sources, and going through the federal commission office seemed to be like the best course of action, and then contacting all of the third-party, credit unions and credit card companies independently.
Right. At least that scenario totally was fine for your circumstance.
Correct.
Right? Which
yeah.
Probably, if a lot of people get this level of identity theft, it's a very similar circumstance.
Right.
It's probably going to be a federal thing.
And if it's local, if somebody, got your credit card information and is making like a bunch of purchases in your city, I think the police would probably be like the right place to go.
Right.
Mine was kind of this weird like.
I think that's more likely if somebody picked up your credit card or skimmed your credit card with the credit card skimmers at a local gas station,
right.
Or you hear about like waitresses and stuff. Like if you give your card to them, they can have like skimmers or waiters or waitresses skim your credit card before they actually like run the transaction. In that scenario, I'm sure, right, not attacking the credit card or the waitress industry, but
right. Well, so I mean, like, right, in Europe they bring the scanner to your table, and because nobody trusts them.
Right. Right, it's a great policy. Right?
But here we've noticed in Chicago there's a lot more brunch places that we might go to that they bring it to your table as well. So it's a growing trend because I think identity theft is getting
right. But that's more like what may happen in like a local attack scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
And what happens? I know way more people that have had like their credit card numbers just like stolen or whatever, whether it's in person or not in person. Somebody's been able to like get a hold of their credit card information and just buy a bunch of stuff they're not supposed to.
Yeah, the way that my identity was like infiltrated was really intense and like beyond what I've experienced before with like, oh yeah, Target, had a data hack and your Target credit card was compromised.
Right.
This was like full blown scary.
Right.
And I want to say, like, I also want to say if you are a credit thief or an identity theft, you went about this in a really bad way, because doing 18 hard pulls in 3 weeks, like, you didn't get approved for anything.
Right. It was a complete failure as far as we're aware, that nothing got opened.
Nothing.
And throughout the entire process.
On day one,
which
they
is
applied
crazy.
for 5 credit cards.
Which is crazy because, right, that must have just set off a red flags, because we could have applied for any credit cards with your credit score and like get them approved in 2 seconds. So
Right.
it just-
But I will say, when I did call the different credit card companies directly, they said a lot of the applications were actually still pending because they raised red flags. So I think somewhere in their process, they are checking addresses and names, and they noticed it was a new name and a new address. And so I know when I did legally change my name, I had to provide documents to all of my current creditors updating my name. And so I think because they got my name so colossally wrong, I do think that triggered some warning bells, because several of the companies said, oh, this was still pending, or oh, we denied it to put it under further review because we had red flags.
Right. So
That's good.
So not the worst, possible thing. There was some check and balance. So, we'll give them a little bit of credit, but for how important this like repository of information is, for how bad this process is to go through, and how, blatantly insecure it is just really kind of astounding.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason that, these agencies have like tons and tons and tons of money, right? Like, there's no way that they couldn't make these systems better by applying like any thought or any effort whatsoever. They're just not doing it, I guess.
Okay, so next steps after I contacted all of the companies, what else did I do to protect myself further? So as soon as I hopped on the phone with the 3 credit agencies, the very first one asked me on the phone, were you a victim of identity theft? And I said yes, and I had my report from the Federal Commission or whatever, and I submitted that over. And immediately what that did was they put a security freeze on my account for a year, saying anytime I did get my credit pulled, I would have to... The credit agency had my phone number. They have the correct phone number. And so they would have to call me and verify with me that I wanted my credit to be checked or wanted whatever I was applying for. So that was a good thing to do. And then beyond that, that was like their fraud prevention. And then beyond that, they also did a credit freeze on my account, which I asked them to do. They will do this for free. There's like a credit lock or a credit freeze, and they have to do one of them for free, and the other one can cost money. But they're legally obligated to be able to provide this service for free. So don't let them upcharge you, because like it's basically the same thing. But what this means is my credit now is completely frozen. Any creditor that got an application that said, yes, I want an auto loan, for example, they would immediately get a hit back from the credit bureau that says, no, sorry, Angela is not approved for a credit loan of any kind because her credit score is frozen. So this was protection for me against future attacks, saying that any application that anybody submits is immediately shot down. So they don't even do a hard inquiry, they just immediately bounce it back, which was super nice. And when I called and reported my theft with even just one credit bureau, they're legally obligated to tell the other 2 credit bureaus that they also need to put the freeze on your account.
Okay, and they'll do that on your behalf then?
Yes. Well, I guess the fraud prevention for a year.
Sure.
Now, I still recommend... I called all 3 independently because I wanted to make sure I was disputing every single inquiry and talking to them myself to make sure they were putting on the credit freeze for me. But you can... So, it's kind of reassuring. You can just call one. Like, let's say you find this out and you're, at work and you're pinched for time. The 2 things that I would recommend doing right away are to file that federal identity theft report and then call at least one of the agencies and report it so that they will tell the other 2. But then as soon as you have a bit more time, I would say go ahead and call the other 2 agencies, look up their records and make sure you're disputing those charges right away. Because what I know you don't want to do is let like 18 hard inquiries sit on your account that weren't yours.
Right, because if you don't fix this problem, right, as a person, and you just let them go, it will destroy your credit score, right? If you didn't resolve this problem. If you just let it like try and like go away or be like, oh yeah, I froze my credit and that's it. That's all I need to worry about. you'll suddenly, log in 3 months and your credit score is going to be like 500.
Yeah, so I did notice, my credit score went down, I think even by like 20 points already, just from some of these starting to roll in. And as soon as I like called and started getting them off, and then I logged in, and they can take up to 90 days to remove an inquiry from your report. But now when I do log in, I'm seeing that my, credit score is going up and up again. So it does self-correct. But yeah, you don't want to, hard inquiries drop off typically after 2 years, but like there's no point in waiting 2 years. It wasn't you. And I had several agencies and different credit card companies tell me, it is your duty to report identity theft. So it's definitely something that you should do. You should just, it's a pain. It really stunk for me. I am a true millennial. I hate talking on the phone. And so if you're counting, that's 18 credit card companies and 3 credit reporting agencies. So that was 21 phone calls that I had to make, which basically I'd rather die. It was very hard to do that, but totally worth it. I did the right thing, and it was a peace of mind from knowing, I called these credit card companies because what the other thing that I didn't want was to not report a hard inquiry. And let's say it was one of the first few that maybe slipped through the cracks, maybe somehow they finally got my last name right. And if you have a credit card open and you report it quickly, they'll close it and they'll fix it. But if you let it go on, then all of a sudden your credit score is not just dropping because of these inquiries, it's dropping because now you have unpaid loan balances, missed payments because you don't know them, it's not going to your address, and you don't want to be responsible for that debt.
Right, so, that's a whole nother dimension, right? Having people open stuff that they're not supposed to have, or the rental accounts. Yeah, if you start missing payments on whatever those rental properties are, and they can come after if you get submitted into a claims agency for not paying your rent or not paying credit cards, then it's a whole nother group of agencies you have to deal with. And those people are very not receptive to fraudulent circumstances. They don't care. They're just looking for money, and you potentially need to give them money because your name's on everything.
Right. And now you might be asking, well, after all that, did it work? Did you stop getting attacked? I will say the week after I put the security freeze on all of my accounts, I got 5 different alerts that whoever had stolen my identity was continuing to try to apply for things. And after that week, I have had no further attacks. So basically, Mr. Identity Theft person was, throwing noodles against the wall to see what would stick, and nothing stuck using my information anymore. It kept getting bounced back saying, this credit is frozen. And so I'm sure he got a list from somewhere of compromised data and went on to the next name on the list, right?
Right.
And so
this is a whole industry, a whole job, right? The people may not even be in the United States that are trying to run this stuff, but they can do this stuff from anywhere. You're not the only person with this leaked information online, right? Stores and tax information and credit card information has been leaking for over a decade now in the United States.
So mail is really, really insecure because if people get one piece of your mail,
right?
Then it has your information on it.
Right, and right now in the United States it's our tax season, and very important information is just being circulated through everybody's mailbox, and if somebody intercepts any of these mails, they have all of your information to open this up.
My mind that this is still our process because it seems so insecure. My sister sent a package just last week to be delivered to my other sister. It ended up being delivered an hour away.
Right. So
actually being physically delivered. So it's not just your mail gets stolen out of your mailbox. It's your mail never even comes to you because it's put in the wrong sorting pile and taken to a different address and gets delivered. And now somebody has your, information. That's scary. Or maybe you forgot to change your, one thing we do whenever we move is we set up mail forwarding, which happens for a year after we move. And it's kind of nice because then I try to change addresses on everything, but if there's something I miss, I can see that yellow sticker tells me I need to make sure I change my address on this. And, that's a huge thing to do because otherwise if you move and your W-2 gets sent to your prior address, now they have all of your information.
Right. It's all your bank accounts, all your investment accounts, anything related with your company of where you work or any company you did work at in the past, right? They all have whatever address was on file. And if you don't change that after you move, when tax season rolls around, they're obligated to send that information to your previous address, and that's where it's going to end up. So if somebody moved into your house that is, not that great or wants to sell this information online for whatever amount of money that is, you're just out of luck.
Which is crazy to me because I feel like if there's one thing that I wish I could enroll in like paperless statements for, it would be anything that has my social security number on it.
Right.
I just don't want that printed and distributed. It blows my mind that still happens in the year 2020.
Yeah, I mean, with social engineering, it's a lot easier in today's market to trick people into giving your information out online, and people are worried about like email scams and like people monitoring your bank logins when you're on your computer or keyloggers. But like getting somebody's physical mail that has sensitive information on it is probably the easiest thing in the world to do.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's technically a federal offense to like go and read somebody else's mail, but like, have you ever heard of anybody enforcing that? Like, people could walk down the street in your neighborhood and just like pull mail out of your mailbox and like in the middle of the night, and like nobody would ever even know.
I mean, it's also a federal offense to steal somebody's identity, but it happens 20%,
right.
20% of Americans.
Right, and is this person that stole your identity going to get caught? Right, like very unlikely.
Right. Yeah, no,
So
I think they go like that and arson are the two crimes that are the most difficult to solve.
Right. So this was a horrible process. So what can people do to prevent this from happening to them, right?
Great question. So I would recommend, if you are not making any big purchases immediately, just put a credit freeze on all 3 of your credit reporting agency, accounts. You can turn this on and off at any time. If you want to buy a house, maybe you're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to do anything for a year, and then in 6 months you decide to buy a house. 24 hours beforehand, you can even go online and turn your freeze off and let it come through. So that's a very, very easy thing to do. What kills me is we did a credit score podcast at one point, and I mentioned like, oh yeah, you can freeze your credit. And then what did we do? We didn't do anything with that information. We even knew it. And I was like, whatever, I don't need to do this. You should do it. It takes 2 seconds to set up. It's super duper easy to do. And it's really easy to undo when you decide you do need your credit for something. So there's no reason to not do that. It is a bit of a pain because you have to do it with each agency independent, but it is totally worth it because then if somebody does get your information and they try to apply for something, it just doesn't let them.
Right. And so that's the agency's fault for like not making this process way easier than it is. But right, that's just the way it is in 2020. That's the current process.
And it's not too bad.
But everybody should have, like, credit is super important for our economy, and you should definitely have 2-factor authentication on that, right?
Right.
Like, they should definitely be, like, a major thing is happening. I'm trying to like get a home loan or like rent a house or do something that's like a pretty significant step that I don't do every day. Then somebody should be like texting me and being like, hey, did you do this? Right? Like, that's the least that could happen in that scenario, right?
Right.
And all I have to do is say, yes, I'm doing that, or no, I'm not, right?
Which is why basically I think everyone's credit should be frozen. And then
Yes.
because if you apply for something and you forgot that your credit was frozen, you will get an alert that's like, did you do, we noticed this activity, was it you? And you could even hop on the phone. Let's say you're sitting at the car dealership and you're ready to buy a car and you're like, oh shoot, I forgot my credit was frozen. You can literally call that credit agency right at that moment and say, hey, I'm gonna, buy a car right now. I need you to unfreeze my credit. And they can basically just flip a switch and it's unfrozen. The application will go through and you can apply for your loan.
Right. And hopefully you're the only one that can do that because you have the correct spelling of your last name.
And the phone number. Because they have to call you and talk to you.
Your device.
You have to supply your information. Now, obviously, do I think based on all the information of mine that got like changed and added that somehow they could change your number? Sure, but like, is this on the credit reporting agencies to build up their security? Yes, because obviously this is a big problem.
Yep.
So,
the other big problem I saw with your circumstance was you just coincidentally weren't using the notifications on mint.com, right? Which,
yes.
Again, we've talked about mint.com a million times. It's a free service that lets you track your expenses. They also just happen to be monitoring credit at the same time, or you can see your credit score through the website or through the app. And you didn't have the alert turned on to notify you via email or even notification on the phone of like when a new credit inquiry was pulled, which I do on mine. And that's how I've always found that somebody was like trying to like do anything with my credit cards or anything like that, or anytime we've applied for like a loan or whatever, or a car or whatever. I get a notification immediately that says, hey, another hard inquiry has been pulled.
Yeah.
Did you do this? And I'm like, yes. And I really appreciate that somebody told me within like an hour of this happening, right?
Yeah. So definitely having that on and paying attention to those emails is important.
Right. Because then you could stop it immediately.
I'm
You know
pretty
for
loose
sure.
about that.
Yeah. You know for sure that, that's not going to continue proliferating because you can stop it on the first attack.
Yeah.
And you would just coincidentally in the last like 2 years have like done a lot of hard pulls, and we've like done a lot of stuff, and we like bought a bunch of places, and we've moved a couple times. And all right, so you just were like doing this a lot, so I think just turned off all the notifications from the site at one point.
Yeah, I've been trying to clean up my email because sometimes I just get a lot, and so I have been trying to unsubscribe from things. And Mint also was sending me like a lot of apply for this credit card, and I was just like, I'm sick of Mint is emailing me all the time, so I turned it off. That is a very valuable thing. I will say that usually I log into Mint at least once a week as well, if not more frequently, just to check on things. That's how I've caught different credit card in the past, where we've had people like steal a credit card and charge $3,000 Super Bowl tickets, because if you're going to go big, go big. But that's very easy for me to spot. So again,
Right.
do some smaller stuff first. So usually I log in a lot more and I review that. I will say that this person did time this to happen over Christmas, where I was probably not paying even as much attention as I normally do because I was enjoying time with family. So that was my fault for not being attentive, not having these notifications turned on. But that is a really good point, Brett, that if you aren't going to freeze your credit, which I really strongly recommend that you do, go ahead and either through Credit Karma or Mint.com. Those are the two that I use the most and trust. They're both free. And I was telling one of my coworkers about this, and he said, well, why are those services free? It's because they advertise to you. They get paid a lot of money by credit card companies to put their ads up. So they're making plenty of money. They don't have to charge you anything. And Mint.com was actually purchased by Intuit, which owns TurboTax. And they will advertise for you to just do your taxes with them as well. So you will get some ads, but it's not super intrusive. I haven't found it to be the case.
I don't really even notice it anymore. I just close the ads.
Yeah.
They make it pretty easy to like get them out of the way.
But that is why it's free, because I know a lot of people don't trust things that are free by nature. But they are great services. I have used both of them for actually over a decade now.
Easily.
Easily.
I might be approaching the 15 to 20 year mark with Mint. It was one of the first like.
You got it when you were 10.
Yeah, it was the early days on the internet before Intuit bought them. It was one of the first great things I ever found on the internet.
Yeah. So, anyways, we're big fans of both of those sites, and either one of them, like I said, I did get the thing in the mail, but then Credit Karma made it very easy for me to like figure out what was going down and compile information. So I recommend both of those strongly. As well as I really do strongly recommend just doing a credit freeze with all three credit agencies. You can do it online. It's not hard. And it's totally worth it. Because let me tell you again, I cannot strongly reinforce calling 21 different companies and having to explain to them that your credit was stolen and your last name is different than what they think it is, but this is how they might be able to look it up, is a process that I do not wish on anybody. It was horrible, and it just feels really intrusive. It just feels like, oh my God, somebody has this information about me, and it causes a lot of anxiety. So save yourself the headache, protect yourself. That 5 minutes to set up the credit freeze is totally worth it.
Right. And we were lucky in this scenario, right? It could have been way, way worse for us. We got lucky that we got a letter at the time when we weren't monitoring this stuff. We got lucky that the person was a dummy and didn't somehow have your name correctly spelled and got flagged in the system. But if they would have gotten even one card open or two, this could have been way, way worse.
Right.
So, the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yeah.
Good old fashioned sayings.
Totally worth it.
Always coming true again.
All right, well, that wraps up this week's episode. If you do have any further questions, or if you have been a victim of identity theft and you just want somebody to talk to who understands, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to help with any questions you might have about how to do these credit freezes, or if you're looking for any of the links I was talking about, with the Federal Trade Commission or these credit agencies, I will link them on our website when I post this podcast, so you have that pool of information out there, because I think it's really helpful for a lot of people. So
yep.
Thanks for tuning in this week, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Money in the Bank. Make sure to subscribe to us on the iTunes or Stitcher app so that you get weekly alerts every time we post a podcast. Or if you want, you can visit my website, moneyinthebankpodcast.com. And if you want to reach out with any questions or further comments, please email me at Angie@moneyinthebankpodcast.com. I look forward to hearing from you.
Money in the bank.